I think that that's the difference between larger companies and smaller independents, is because if you're a larger company, you're thinking to yourself,
So Eric, welcome to the show. It's a real pleasure to have you.
glad to be here.
Yeah, so I love getting the show started off by having the guests just sort of paint the picture for the listeners in terms of how you got to where you are today. So take us back to Eric in middle school, in high school. What was that like growing up for you? How did you enter dentistry and then business, and sort of just paint that journey for us?
This is a journey that could take a while. Just let you know, Jason. No, I'm just kidding. It's been a good journey. I was entrepreneurial by nature, and actually ended up going into the Navy for about 4 years. Did my time on an aircraft carrier, which I loved. I went out, got to the University of Florida, and had a passion for business, and started doing consulting work for companies up to about $20 million in revenues by myself. And then I was asked to start a dental practice, and married a dentist. And when I did that, ultimately, um, I always say the best thing was is I didn't know what I didn't know, which was I didn't know you weren't supposed to grow and scale a dental practice. I didn't know that. I just thought you hire doctors and you expand and you invest in marketing. And so I found out very quickly back then, this is quite a while back, that was unique. And so when I started growing and scaling it so quickly, I started getting asked from other specialists if I would help other general practitioners. And that led me into working with thousands of doctors all over the country and outside of the country, actually helping them grow and scale dental practices quickly. And then I ended up working with a lot of medical practices as well, doing the exact same thing, which is very quickly, as an MBA, because I went back, I have my MBA, and also I went back and got my financial investment licenses. When people
Mhm.
started taking money out of a practice and putting it somewhere doing 5%, I had to know why, because that taking money out of an asset doing 30% and putting it somewhere doing 5% didn't really make good financial math. So I said, we've got to figure this out. So once I started getting involved in that side, I started really bringing in the investment and financial investment side of the consulting, which is, let's talk about what your goals, hopes, and dreams are, and then let's do some math. And then let's then start utilizing business acumen to invest in the business and scale the business and start growing it. And so getting really great at capital management, and building out operations and scale so that people could pull back. And so that led me to the point where I am today, where, at this point, we've taken people from 9 million to $100 million in revenue in 12 months. And that sounds like a crazy number, but the truth is that you can push scale and you can push growth. And I'll tell you a quick story. Now, this stuff, I'm so passionate about this stuff, I could go all over the place. But I'll say this: one of my greatest stories is taking a young mother who had just started a practice, who was struggling, who had two practices, and then showing her how to get completely out of the dental chair so she could focus on her family, but then grow the business significantly. So, learning how to take the passion for business, finance, math, that's kind of my background, and then helping people grow has been a lot of fun, a lot of passion.
Awesome. Well, thanks for painting that sort of picture for us. Thanks for your service too, by the way, in the Navy. I was in the Navy as well
Appreciate
for 10 years in the Nurse Corps. Yeah. So how did you, well, first of all, were you with your wife at the time that she started her practice? So did you like experience the whole startup phase of it?
Every little piece of it, every piece. I enjoyed that part because one of the things I asked for was that I didn't want any type of system created without me putting it in place first. I didn't want to have some other doctor's system. So I said, the agreement was I would come help as long as we didn't hire anyone until I said so. And I said, I want to build out every process within the business. And so we worked together day by day, and I would focus on all the business and she would focus on ultimately the medicine. And it worked out really well. And so I was there I would pick up the phones. I would do every part of this business. So I've literally been every part of it except for in the mouth. I've never done that.
Awesome. So what are some of the things that you learned as you were getting things started? Because you were doing some other business consulting, was that right? How did you go from whatever you were doing before in consulting to dentistry? And how did you like figure that out? Or is that just something you're naturally good at? And a lot of concepts in business are very similar. So did you just take sort of what you were applying or what you learned from doing other consulting and apply it to the practice?
Great question. I absolutely. To me, it was a widget. I know that seems weird to say, but it's the same way I can move from chiropractors to dentists to surgeons. And
Right.
it's the same concepts. We still have to build the organizational structure. We still have to look at leadership. We still have to look at the art and science of a business and marketing and capacity and all these same concepts when we get into business. We have to always look at that, marketing capacity, team, operations. And so I'm just using the same puzzle. To me, it was no different moving into the healthcare industry because to me it was just another service that was the product ultimately. And but the business side of it was no different. Of course, there's every business has its own seasonality, it has its own, characteristics and things you have to know within that business, but a lot of it's the same, right? A lot of business concepts are pretty universal. We don't like to think that they are, but they are.
Hmm. Yeah. So how long ago was that startup phase for you? Like how vivid are those, memories of creating those processes and systems?
You know what I find today surprising is before we opened, we were booked out for months. And I'm surprised at the amount of people today who start in this industry, but they wait to get patients until they're open. And to me, that never made sense, which is I was always big on the front side. Let's have people lined up trying to get into the business. And I'll see this even through an acquisition. Somebody will have two locations and they'll go to a third location and they'll wait. And it never made sense to me. Let's ramp it up before we ever open the door. So the part that I remember probably most vividly, the parts I care to remember, sometimes maybe all the admin work, maybe I'll let that stuff slide out. But I do remember the focus on two things, which is one, making sure we had patients before we open the door, and two, assembling a great team. Assembling a great team is so important, and I think those two things made us get off to such a huge start.
So yeah, I totally agree with you. I see practices all the time. It doesn't really matter what the practice is, but a lot of new practice owners just don't really think ahead in terms of doing those pre bookings. I mean, we're actually in the process of writing a book right now, and just like you said, the concepts are very similar across business and marketing, sort of whatever you're marketing for. We're doing like a pre-launch, marketing and pre-selling books, and just like you mentioned, healthcare professionals should be doing the exact same thing, right? When they're getting ready to launch their practice, like the website should be up way early. They should be having, pre-bookings happening many weeks ahead of schedule. And that's just obviously one small thing that a lot of people miss. What are some other things that you've seen, healthcare practitioners miss as they're starting practices?
Well, there's two parts about that. And by the way, past success doesn't actually technically always equate to future success. So when people expand, they've got to be careful. The great Jim Collins will talk about he was born of success, and we've got to make the right when we go to expand, we've got to be careful to utilize some type of a systematic method. I will tell you, going back to that question, is I think one of the biggest things people have to be careful of and think through is your team. I think that that's the difference between larger companies and smaller independents, is because if you're a larger company, you're thinking to yourself, how do we assemble the best team? How do we get the great people in? How do we really get people who can run the show? Where I find more on the independent side, it's, well, I'll try to be the owner or operator slash doing all the clinical procedures, plus I'm going to run it, plus I'm going to hire somebody for as little as possible who can run some of the administrative tasks. And that is probably one of the biggest things that slow healthcare companies to scale, because they don't have the right team and they're trying to get it all done themselves. So I would say the lack of understanding that there has to be an investment into top talent, I think is what slows an independent versus a larger group. Larger groups will go get the talent. Smaller independents don't do that, and often will buy. I've seen them spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a piece of equipment that they rarely use or need, yet they won't go hire somebody who could transform the business.
Yeah, so I see that pretty often too, and a lot of people, a lot of healthcare practitioners, they're what I see, especially when they're brand new, they're sort of testing the waters, right? They're trying to start a practice, as lean as possible, which is okay, but you're totally right. It really inhibits, growth for an individual practitioner to try and be the admin, to try and be the CEO, to try and be the front desk receptionist and the clinician, and it's okay for a very short period of time, but like you mentioned, it's you got to really focus on hiring good talent as well. When it comes to hiring and finding that good talent, have you seen any recipes for success there? Because certainly a really small practice, they don't have the sort of the benefits packages. Typically they don't have the clout of working for a large organization. What can some of the smaller practices do as they're working to scale up to attract that top talent?
That's a great question. I think that we have to go back to what really pulls people in, because I do see a lot of times health organizations are trying to attract that talent, and how do you pull that person over to your side? And the truth is maybe idealistic as this sounds, is truly vision and strategy, because people want to be part of building something. There's so many people that are talented and maybe they were right below where they wanted to be, but they didn't get the opportunity or haven't had the opportunity within the organization they were in to really show their leadership capabilities. So there's often times where when we bring somebody in, we can bring someone in of great talent and we sell them. Ultimately, I say sell in the kindest of ways. What I mean is we bring them in, we get them alongside our vision. Where are we going with this business? How can they play a part? How does it affect them in their future? What kind of upward mobility does it give them? We have to be able to sell that vision. And I will say that a lot of people that start in especially an independent side don't have a vision. It's sometimes like, well, I'm just trying to be successful. What is successful? So I think sharing a true vision of where this thing's going, because if you're bringing somebody who's talented in, I'm sure then you have some vision of where you're going. You have to get someone excited about coming alongside with you and fighting together. But they only do that if, ultimately speaking, they know where they're going. So you have to be able to paint a picture to get someone excited to help them build, and knowing that when you get there, they will be rewarded. And there's a lot of people. I've brought in so many people in that I've been lucky and blessed to bring in and attract some great talent. And most of them take a pay cut to come work with me because of where we go as a company, where we continue to go, and what their opportunities are. They know that the opportunities are greater. So I think that vision is really important.
Yeah. And what are those sort of rewards essentially that you're sort of selling them? Is it opportunities to earn more down the road? Is it partnership opportunities? Equity? How do you structure that typically?
It could be a lot of things, right? It could be that they want leadership capabilities. Maybe it's something they want to put on a resume. Maybe it's more income. Maybe it's phantom equity. And if there was some type of ownership sell at some point, they get something. Maybe it is equity. It could be a lot of different things, and everyone's motivated differently. I think sometimes we have to be careful not to just tell somebody, "Hey, I'll just give you equity," or finding out what somebody wants. Sometimes somebody just wants the ability to be in a position where they can affect change. And then oftentimes if they see that upward mobility having some financial return to them, that's pretty easy, but it could be a lot of different things. I've seen plenty of people who just want to have a leadership say or be involved in decision making and growing the practice. And then I've seen people who just want equity.
Right.
So I think everyone's a little different. And depending on where your overall financial strategy goes, I think you have to be careful with that one.